All right, now we will have the detailed introduction of the paper. And the name of the paper, we know that the name of the paper is Audit and Assurance. Remember one thing, that there's a difference between the audit and assurance. Like when we say audit, audit is an activity. Now, activity means, like, for example, you will be going there, you will be going through the ledgers, you'll be going through the books, records, the financial statements, you will be looking at all those transactions. And then once you're done with all this activity, like looking at the transaction, the books, the ledgers, the trial balances, and ultimately the financial statements, then you will be giving the assurance, which is the product. Now, the product will be that whether or not the financial statements are true and fair. We'll talk about this later on. So just name of the paper is Audit and Assurance. Audit is an activity and assurance is the product of that. We'll discuss this definition in detail when we are going to the first chapter, which is Introduction to the Audit. So there we will be talking about, first let me just write Introduction to the Audit. This will be the first chapter. So Introduction to the Audit. Remember, this is my sequence of the F8 exam, the Audit and Assurance exam. In the book, it is going to be a different sequence. So I suggest you to go with my sequence because my notes are set in a similar way. So in the first chapter, which is Introduction to the Audit, we'll be talking about the definition of the audit. The definition of the audit. The audit is an activity, independent appraisal activity, in which the auditor is supposed to give the opinion on the set of the financial statement being audited. So we'll be discussing the definition of the audit, and then we will be discussing the objective of the external audit. Like there are two types of audit, internal audit and external audit. So mainly we are talking about the external audit unless and until I say specifically the internal audit. So when I say simple audit, the plain audit term, that simply means external audit, which is going to be the statutory audit, or you can also say the annual audit. So audit and the objective of the audit. So what is objective of the audit? We'll be discussing that. And then we have what is assurance engagement. What is assurance and what is engagement? So what is assurance engagement? And then we'll be talking about the types of the assurance engagement, the types of assurance. Like there are different types of assurance, for example, reasonable assurance, for example, limited assurance, positive assurance, negative assurance. We'll be talking about that. And there's no concept of absolute assurance. We'll be discussing that as well. Then going further, we'll be talking about the rights and duties of the auditor. This is something very important to understand. So what are the rights? What are the duties? The statutory rights, the statutory duties. And then we will be having the merits and demerits, and simply, the values mainly, and the limitations of the audit. Like, for example, the values means the advantages, and limitation, we do not call it disadvantage, but mainly it's the limitation. For example, we do the audit on the sampling basis. This is the limitation. We do not call a disadvantage, but this is simply the limitations. And then we will be talking about the international standards on auditing, regarding or following the international standards on auditing in doing the audit. And then going further, we'll be talking about the appointment and removal of auditor. Now, again, this is something, if you have done the law paper, the F4 paper, you have studied this thing over there in the corporate law. But for example, if you are coming through the exemption, then there is no problem. We'll be discussing that. So this is the first chapter we are going to study, which includes the audit, the objective of the audit, the assurance engagement, the types of assurance, the rights and duties, the values, the limitations. So this will make your base regarding the audit, the concept of audit, the concept of assurance, the types of assurance, who can be the auditor, who can become the auditor, is there any body which checks the auditor as well? So all those things within the first chapter. This is going to be the first chapter. And then the second chapter according to my sequence, is going to be the ethics. Now, this is not the ethics which you have studied in your F1 or business and technology paper, which is the first paper of the ACCA, in which we were talking about the relativism, we were talking about the absolutism, egoism, utilitarianism, ethical approaches. We are not talking about that particular type of ethics. Here in the F8 paper, you will be talking regarding the audit, which is specific to the auditor and specific to the audit. For example, first of all, the fundamental principles of ethics. Fundamental principles of ethics. For example, professional behavior, the auditor should have professional behavior, and then integrity thing, competence and due care. So fundamental principles of ethics. So once we are done with that, then we will be discussing the threats to the objectivity. Now, the threats to the objectivity or the threats to the independence is self-interest threat, acting in your own interest, self-review threat, reviewing your own work. And then mainly in this chapter, we will be having the situations which is explained by the ACCA Code of Ethics. Like when the auditor is doing the audit or performing the audit, there can be instances, there will be the situations where the independence of the auditor may be compromised. And the ACCA Code of Ethics give you the example of those situations. They tell you what threat is going to be arise in that particular situation. And then they tell you the safeguards, how to deal with that situations in order to avoid that particular threat, reduce that particular threat, eliminate that particular threat. For example, when you are doing the audit, the client may offer you the significant gifts, which may threaten your objectivity. So what ACCA Code of Ethics says regarding that, that if the client offers you the significant gifts and hospitality, this may affect your independence, this may create self-interest and familiarity threat. And what you need to do is to politely decline those gifts. So do not accept those gifts, politely decline. Now, this is the safeguard the ACCA has been telling to you in this particular chapter. So ethics is all about the situations. I'll be also telling you that how these chapters are tested within the exam paper. So regarding the first chapter, Introduction to the Audit, the exam perspective. So the exam perspective, I'll be writing in the red thing. So the exam thing, mainly you will be getting the knowledge-based element from it, knowledge element. Now, when I say knowledge element, that means a straightforward question. For example, the examiner may ask you define the types of assurance engagement, differentiate between the reasonable and limited assurance. So probably you will be getting the knowledge element from this part, this chapter. Knowledge element means the straightforward question. And also, again, you can have some objective test questions, but we do not expect any case study from this introduction to the audit chapter. Now, in the ethics, so these fundamental principles of ethics, these threats to the objectivity, they are being tested many times in the F8 exam. The knowledge-based part, the straightforward thing, examiner may ask you define the fundamental principle, explain the fundamental principles of ethics, and explain the threats to the objectivity. So this is the knowledge-based. I'll write KB, the knowledge-based element. And then regarding the situations, this is something very important to understand. Examiner will be giving you either the case study for 8 to 10 marks. Sometimes they give you identify and explain 4 ethical threats and provide safeguards. So it is for 8 marks. Sometimes they tell you 5 for ethical threats and provide the safeguard. Then it is for 10 marks. So when I say case study, this is the constructed response question, the CR question in the exam, constructed response question. Remember, we have already discussed the format, that there will be three constructive response questions, one for 30 marks and then 2 for 20 marks. So the constructed response question is regarding the case study. Examiner will be giving you the case study from which you are supposed to identify and explain the ethical threats and provide the safeguards. Or you may have the objective test case questions. Now, again, the objective test question works the same way. You will be having a case study, a small case study, but there you are not supposed to write something. You will be having the objectives, for example, 5 questions. So there will be a small case study and then 5 MCQs, 5 MCQs, 5 objective questions which you are going to attempt. So objective test questions is about a case study, and then you have the objective questions alongside it, which you are going to solve. So this is part of the section A. So objective questions. So this ethics part is important because you may have a case study question in the constructed response questions, or again, you may have the objective test case question. So there are many situations when we will go to the ethics chapter. There are many situations, for example, gifts and hospitality, the loans and guarantees, the close business relationship, the compensation and evaluation policy. There are so many things the ACC has provided in the ACCA Code of Ethics, which we need to study. So we'll be studying those situations. We'll identify which threat uh, is in a particular situation, and then the safeguards provided by the ACCA Code of Ethics. Something, so this ethics chapter has much significance in the exam because it can be tested either way: knowledge-based, case study, and then the objective test case question. Okay, so this is regarding the second chapter. Okay, now moving towards the third. The third chapter is the corporate governance. Now, again, for example, if you're coming from the ACCA background, the business and technology paper includes a detailed chapter on the corporate governance. But for example, if you are not aware of it, there is no problem because we will be studying it from the scratch. So corporate governance is again why we are studying this chapter within the F8 paper, because when we are doing the audit, so there are so many things other than the financial statement as well. For example, the compliance thing, the corporate governance compliance thing. Now, the corporate governance compliance report even is part of the annual report, so the auditor should be aware of it. It's not about only looking at the financial statement. We talk about the whole annual report. So within the annual report, there is this corporate governance compliance report as well. So the auditor should be aware of it. So corporate governance, what we are going to study in this is the definition of the corporate governance, the system through which the companies are directed and controlled, and then the benefits the company will have when they comply with the corporate governance. And then we will be studying the principles within the corporate governance. The principles means, for example, what the code says regarding the board structure, how should be the board structure, how many directors are there, and who should lead the board, what is the balance in the board, what are EDs, what are NEDs, so different sort of directors we are having within the board. And we have the board committees, for example, the audit committee, the remuneration committee, the risk committee. So we'll be discussing the board structure, directors, board committees, and other principles of the corporate governance. So there are so many things. Now, this is what we are going to study. How this is tested in the exam. So just like ethics, first of all, you may have the knowledge-based element from it. That means the straightforward question. For example, examiner may ask you to define the benefits of having the audit committee within the company. So this is a sort of question you may have in the knowledge-based elements. Differentiate between, for example, the EDs and the NEDs. Okay, so you can have sort of this question. Roles of the nomination committee, for example. So you may have a knowledge-based element from it. The second element is again the objective test case question. Examiner will be giving you a small case study alongside the objective question. For example, they give you a small case study in which there was a director who was working as the ED, and then he became the NED, immediately retiring after ED. So the examiner is going to ask you, is this allowed within the code of corporate governance? And there will be sort of different options over there. So objective test case questions. So that means you need to know each and every provision within the code of corporate governance. So you may need to understand all the principles, the board structure, EDs and NEDs, and what are the factors of independence of the entities, because they are being tested. Once we go to the exam kit, you will see they are being tested within the exam question. So many small things, although the easy ones, so many things we need to understand within this chapter as well. And then again, the constructed response question, the case study question, again tested many times in the FAIR exam since, you can say, 2007. So because we are having this F8 audit and assurance team since December 2007. So if you talk about December 2007 to this 2022, several times examiner has tested this constructed response question in the F8 exam pertaining to the corporate governance. Now the requirement is that you have the case study, identify and explain the corporate governance deficiencies within the system. Like, for example, Code of Corporate Governance suggests that the CEO and the chairman should be two separate persons. And in that question, there will be one person acting both. So you need to identify and explain the deficiency, and then the examiner will ask you to provide the recommendation. The recommendation is what the Code of Corporate Governance say regarding that particular situation. So again, the corporate governance has good significance in this F8 paper, audit and assurance paper. So corporate governance, the definition, benefits, principles, and board structures thing. And then we can expect this in the knowledge-based objective test case question and as a constructed response question. Okay, then we have the fourth chapter, which is going to be again internal audit. So this is again a quite interesting chapter. So you need to understand what is internal audit first of all, and the definition thing. And then we have the difference between the internal and external audit. So there are so many differences. Again, this is something which has already been tested many times in the exam. Examiner can ask this time as well. So difference between the internal and external audit, because nowadays we're having the computer-based exam, and within the exam center, students are having a different sets of paper. Like when it used to be a manual exam, everyone was having the same paper. But with this computer-based testing, everyone within the exam center may have a different paper. So they have a set of questions which the computer can shuffle to, so they have usually 4 to 5 sets. Although, the sequence may be changed, but you can expect a completely different paper as well. So anything can be tested. Definition, difference between the internal and external audit, and then the benefits of having the internal audit department, the roles and objectives of the internal audit, and then there is something advantages and disadvantages. Advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing the internal audit function. So advantages and disadvantages of the outsourcing of the internal audit function. So we can expect anything from this area as well within the exam. So definition, difference between the internal and external audit, and the benefits, the roles and responsibilities, the advantages and disadvantages. And again, how this can be tested within an exam question. So you may have a knowledge-based element from it. The knowledge-based element means a straightforward question within the exam. Number 2, you may have the objective test case questions from it. That means, again, examiner will be giving you a case study, and a case study with the objective questions. And number 3, a part of constructed response question. So part of constructed response question. So that means a small case study related to the internal audit, but usually we do not expect a case study question from internal audit, but examiner can test. We do not have much questions from it, but the examiner can ask the questions from the internal audit chapter as well.